Welcome back to U.S. History. In case you forgot what class you were in, that music that was just played that you were listening to was from the 1920s, the Roaring Twenties, as it was well known as. This understanding, of course, with everything going on right now, with the coronavirus and all that has prevented us from having class in the classroom. Thank you, students, for those of you who are participating in this. Thank you for making the effort to try your best. Hopefully you'll be able to understand, be able to watch the videos, be able to get the material done. Remember, you are responsible for all of the work for the remainder of the school year, or at least as long as we have these videos taking place. Just a quick reminder, honors project has been canceled. The oral report and paper that you guys have been working on since last quarter has been canceled, so don't worry about doing that. I'm sure many of you had already gotten to work on it already, facetiously said. And hopefully that will help reassure you guys. Also, no honors homework will be assigned, but everything else will be assigned that is expected from you guys. So as we get going into this, we're at Roman numeral 2 in our notes. Remember, we've already done Roman numeral 1 while we were still in class concerning the 1920s. But as we get started, reminder, of course, you can always pause, replay anything I say. I'm hoping to be able to do these 45-minute lessons in a 15-minute time span. So hopefully we'll be able to get that covered. While America enjoyed more prosperity than ever before, the moral character of society was disappearing. This is Roman numeral 2, culture wars, big letter A, new ideas. Number 1, Darwinism and Marxism. Both of these ideas had existed back in the 19th century, but they gained more support during the 1920s. Darwin's evolutionary theory undermined the scriptural account of creation, and Marx's economic philosophy denied the spiritual side of man as well as man's depravity. A growing disregard of scriptural truth naturally accompanied the acceptance of these views. Number 2, the theory of relativity. This was, of course, created by Albert Einstein. It states that space, time, and matter are not absolute dimensions, but are relative to the location and motion of the observer. Since the Enlightenment, scientists had believed that things were orderly and ruled by natural law and discovered by the scientific method. Suddenly, as one author puts, the physicist thus finds himself in a world from which the bottom has dropped clean out. Seemingly, the absolutes of science were no longer absolute. The problem came with its application. What Americans often did was they wrongly applied relativism to the spiritual realm. Remember, relativism is the idea that, it might be right for you, but it's not right for me. What's wrong for me might not be wrong for you. In fact, even Einstein opposed this application of his theory in this way. He said, gravitation cannot be held responsible for people falling in love. How on earth can you explain in terms of chemistry and physics so important a biological phenomenon as first love? Put your hand on a stove for a minute and it seems like an hour. Sit with that special girl for an hour and it seems like a minute. That's relativity. They believed that Scripture could no longer be considered absolute truth. Thus, they were freed from its moral restraints and responsibilities because these values were dependent upon the observer. Number 3, Sigmund Freud. He was a psychiatrist who proposed freedom from morals to have a happy life. He believed that problems in a person's life is a result of actions done as a child. When concerning morality, he argued against moral restraint because he said it led to emotional disorders. After all, if you can't do what you want, it'll make you feel bad and make you lash out. For those who had already lost their moral bearings, the psychiatrist had now replaced the pastor as counselor. Number 4, Remember that literature and art reflects the culture of the times. For example, the literature and art of this time period will abandon the traditions of the past for the quote-unquote freedoms of the present. Paintings became abstract and depicted inner feelings rather than real images. Poetry was written in free verse, and novels were less organized in their narratives. Themes emphasized despair, disillusionment, the emptiness of modern society, and man's evil. So literature and art changed during the 1920s as well. Number 5, Prohibition. As previously mentioned, Prohibition had been passed as the 18th Amendment during Wilson's presidency. 45 states had eventually approved it. Unfortunately, the law resulted in an increase in illegal activity. Illegal liquor became a lucrative business on the black market, and violent crime increased as gangsters competed for control of the market. The short answer is Prohibition proved impossible to enforce because a large part of the nation was willing to violate the law. Local opposition for Prohibition will grow, especially among Democrats. When Franklin Roosevelt was elected, the days of Prohibition were numbered. The end of the noble experiment, as it was called, came in December 1933 with the passage of the 21st Amendment. Letter B, the Roaring Twenties. As we just described, this was the name for the decade. It describes the culture and lifestyle of many of the young people during this time period. A couple terms to describe the Roaring Twenties: flaming youth and flappers. The young people caught up in this moral vacuum were known as the flaming youth for their rebellious behavior. That's the definition of flaming youth. Before this time, women could be arrested in towns and cities for smoking or dressing immodestly. Of course, obviously, I'm opposed to these views actually being implied today. If anything, it should be applied to women and men, but it especially focused on women here. But in the 1920s, women flaunted their new freedoms of smoking and drinking in public. Bobbed hair and the boyish look were fashionable for these flapper women. Flapper women, if you need a definition for that, talks about the rebellious women during this time. Immorality became glamorous. Virtue was considered old-fashioned. Some people wonder, why was this such a dramatic period? Why, and especially if you actually look at the styles and views of the people, the flaming youth of flappers, if you Googled it right now, you'd look at these people and say, okay, they look normal, they look ordinary, they look, what we would expect. Well, that's the point. Before this time period, the way people dressed, the way people acted, the way people behaved in public was radically different than today. It was radically different than the 1920s. The change happened in the 1920s, which is why there was such a big reaction to it. Nowadays, we see it and we're like, oh, that's normal. Well, back then, it wasn't normal. Another thing that took place during the Roaring Twenties was the breakdown of morality, which weakened the family. From 1870 to the 1920s, divorce will shoot up over 2,000%. The reason was because women were freed up from some of the chores around the house, or families had fewer children. Women had more time to get a job or participate in social activities outside the home, and sometimes those activities interfered with family relationships. Some men took advantage of changing moral standards and neglected their responsibilities as husbands and fathers. Newspapers and movies emphasized stories of immorality, and that emphasis naturally changed attitudes about purity and fidelity. Also, we see an increase in the popularity for the frivolous and the sensational. Young Americans rushed to follow the latest fads, such as wearing raccoon coats, working crossword puzzles, playing a game called mahjong, marathon dancing, flagpole sitting. News informed the nation in detail of scandalous love affairs, murders, and dramatic true-life stories. There are two stories in particular I want to mention to you. Two stories of true-life drama that gripped the nation in 1925 were those of Balto, a heroic dog, and Floyd Collins, a man trapped in a Kentucky cave. Balto led the final dog sled team of a relay that raced more than 600 miles through bitterly cold blizzard conditions in Alaska to deliver serum to treat an outbreak of diphtheria. Floyd Collins was a man who was pinned 125 feet below ground while exploring a cave. His cries were heard the next morning, but workers who rushed to the scene found no satisfactory means to extricate him from under the 7-ton boulder that held him tight. One reporter from the Louisville Courier-Journal wriggled down into the hole to interview Collins. The story soon brought scores of reporters, along with many more curiosity seekers, to the rural Kentucky site. The ordeal continued to breed newspapers and radio reports until after 18 days of underground imprisonment, Collins died. Also, movies became the biggest source of entertainment for the working class. Movies reflected the changing values of the culture. They also changed the way the world viewed America. In a world where standards had broken down, people tended to seek thrills and adventure to fill the void in their lives. Letter C, heroes and villains. In your books, please turn to page 453. Please read the yellow box to yourself about America's air ambassador, pausing this video until you have finished. Once you have finished, please unpause and continue. Number 1, American Idols. No, we're not talking about the TV show that's out right now. We're talking about the people that Americans looked to as, well, their icons, their idols, the people that they wanted to know about during the 1920s. I'm going to mention some of these individuals, just give you one fact statement about each of these people as we go through them. Jack Dempsey, he was a popular boxer. One of his boxing matches became the first time a sporting event sold over $1 million in tickets to a single event. So he was a very popular individual. Probably most famously is the man named Babe Ruth. He thrilled Yankee Stadium with his many home runs, a total of 714, which held as a baseball record for nearly 50 years. Red Grange, he was a popular college football player. A little background, a little more information about him. In his second year at the University of Illinois, Harold Red Grange made football history when in the 1924 game against Michigan, he took the opening kickoff for a 95-yard touchdown run. And in the following 12 minutes of play, Grange scored 3 more touchdowns on runs of 66, 55, and 40 yards. When the coach sat him on the bench to catch his breath, the Illinois crowd protested with a 5-minute ovation for the young hero, who soon came to be called the Galloping Ghost. Grange later joined the Chicago Bears, and his play for that team helped to popularize professional football. Grange died on January 28, 1991. Another individual is a man by the name of Knut Rockne. Knut Rockne was a Norwegian immigrant who coached the Notre Dame football team from 1918 until his death in 1931. His record as coach was 105 wins, 12 losses, 5 ties, and the star players from 1922 to 24 were known as the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame. They were Harry Stuhldreher, Don Miller, Jim Crowley, and Elmer Layden. Future President Ronald Reagan starred as George Gipp, another player from Notre Dame, in the 1940 film titled Knut Rockne All-American. After that, Reagan was known as the Gipper. That's all we have time for today. Make sure you tune in tomorrow or in a few seconds for the next video. Have a good day. Be good, do good. Bye.